Nice to have you with us as we chat to you about what's going on. I know this is the anniversary today of one of the great pitching performances in the history of the sport. I know it's weird to say it. It's Kerry Wood, the complete game, one-hitter, 20 strikeout performance on a freezing day in Wrigley. Remember it well. Derek Bell, I think, got the only hit, if I'm not mistaken, against Kerry and the 98 Cubs in a scenario where as good as it gets. I brought it up because last night James Paxton of the Mariners struck out 16 A's in 7 innings, which was a very, very good performance. A game, by the way, that they ended up losing, but a tremendous performance by Paxton. You had Tehran today, almost pitched a no-hitter. Minaya had the no-hitter for the Athletics against the Red Sox. And Kerry Wood. Now there are a lot of great games, and if you go back and look at a couple of those Randy Johnson games. Perfect game, number 1. 19 strikeouts twice in the same year in 1997, number 2. And of course a 20 strikeout game for Randy Johnson later on. But this game in the history of the sport, and was it Derek Bell got the hit?
Ricky Gutierrez.
Oh, Ricky Gutierrez got the hit. I apologize. Who shortstop, little Ricky Gutierrez, who played for Atlanta, got the hit. It is one of the great games by any major league pitcher you ever see. Wood was dominating, of course. Later he became, in a lot of ways, a closer. I mean, he kind of really never got himself settled in here as a big-time pitcher. 0-3, he did not get the job done in Game 7 against the Marlins after Pryor in the bullpen and Alex Gonzalez, and that was more of a situation. And Bartlett, screwed up the game against the Marlins, who scored all those runs in the top of the 8th inning, down 3-2 in Game 6 in Wrigley Field. Cubbies 4 or 5 outs away from going to a World Series. That now memory has been erased based on 2 years ago, but you get the idea. This performance by Wood, we actually should punch up the box score from it if we can, Ed, and look at the actual amount of pitches. Is one of the great pitching performances in the history of the sport. I mean, there's no other way around it. And listen, that Astro team was a good offensive team. That's a Bagwell, that's Biggio, that's Derek Bell. Gutierrez was a pretty good little shortstop. Not little, he was a good shortstop who could hit. I mean, that was a pretty good team, that Astro team, that, never could hit in the postseason and never hit good pitching. But Wood, a cautionary tale. Wood was really, when you get right down to it, Wood was for a while there, a tremendous pitcher. He was big, he was strong, he had great stuff. Everybody thought that Wood and Pryor in that period there with the Cubbies. Now, Wood got hurt a lot and everything else, which is a mess. But everybody thought that team with those two were going to be in a situation where maybe they would lead them to a championship. Now, as it turns out, it didn't work that way. Pryor obviously got hurt, was a complete mess with all the injuries. We talked to Pryor one spring training out there in Peoria. He was working for San Diego. I remember that conversation. And, he had no regrets. He did not blame Dusty for letting him pitch a lot of innings there in that Game 6 against Miami, against Florida at the time. Wood is a scenario where he just was, He was so good for a while. I don't know if he ever won 20. We can look at his bio. Could somebody punch it up for me and look at Kerry Wood and see what he did? I should have brought this up to you at the top of the program today. But it is one of the great pitching performances in the history of the sport. I mean, obviously, Randy, any perfect game you want to mention, go right ahead. You want to bring up Wells and Cone. Those are against bad teams. This Houston team is a good team. I mean, the 98 Astros went to the postseason. I mean, that is not
no
a bad
21 seasons.
No 21 season.
14-11 was his best year.
14-11. Think about that for a minute. Now, what was he in 98, Eddie? The year that he had this incredible performance against Houston. Was he 13-8?
13-6.
13-6. I knew he. And how many starts did he have that year? 25, 28 starts? 26 starts, 13-6 ERA, what, about 3.1? 3.4. I mean, that is as good. I mean, he had a million. I bet you in about 160 innings, I bet you had about 210 strikeouts. Is that what it was?
Very close. 166. 233.
That was a guess. But, I mean, I remember the year. I mean, Wood was... Now, I don't know, was that his rookie year? Or did he pitch the year before? I don't even know.
That was his rookie year.
It was his rookie year. Now, he did pitch a playoff game. He pitched Game 3 against Atlanta in the playoffs that year. He was good for a while. The Braves won the game, but I think he was pretty good in the game, and I know that was a well-thought-out ball game. It was a Saturday night in Wrigley Field. Everybody was excited about Wood pitching that game. The Braves won. I don't know what his line was. I can look it up. But I do know the Braves won the game and knocked them out. But that was a situation.
6-2 they won.
They won 6-2. What did Wood pitch? What was his line in that game? You got it there? I know he pitched in the game.
There you go. So he went 5 innings pitched, 3 hits, 1 earned run, 5 strikeouts.
How many? I think
97 pitches.
Yeah, that was a Jim Riggleman team. So he didn't pitch. He threw a lot of pitches in that game. But I know that was a highly amped game because Wood was supposed to be the guy who was going to lead the Cubs out of the wilderness. And as it turns out, I don't know if he got hurt. The next year, he got hurt right after.
He missed the entire year the next year.
Of 99. I don't know if it was Tommy John. I forget what the injury was. It may have been Tommy John. And then Pryor came. When did Pryor come? 2001, 2002? Here came Pryor. So for a while, Wood came back, pitched better, and then they added Pryor to that rotation. And everybody thought that with Pryor and Wood, who knows how good they could they.
02.
02 Pryor came. So, and Wood was still a pretty decent pitcher in 02. He came back. He was effective, if nothing else. Big, tall right-hander. He took a lot of stress on that elbow. He threw a lot of stress on that elbow. Hard sinkers and sliders and all those kinds of things. Ball topped over. I mean, he had a lot of stress in his arm. Make a long story short, but that performance was it this day? By the way, is it this day in history? I think it was this day in history. The Astros had the 4th highest batting average in the National League. It was bad weather that day. It was cold, and he hit 100 miles an hour twice, and he had an unhittable curveball that day. So, as good a... What was he? It was May 6th. So it wasn't to the day, May 3rd today. But I remember the day, 98, and he was just absolutely superb with Kerry Wood. I brought it up because of the fact that Harvey today was terrible. Paxton last night for Seattle was good. And, of course, Randy Johnson did what he did over the day. So, but Wood's performance on one of the better notes. Now, listen, Pryor... for a year or two, Pryor won 20 games. And, I think he probably only had the one great year. I can look up Pryor if you wish. Pryor in 2003, did he win 20 that year in 2003? I think he was 20-6, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not positive.
18.
18-6? Okay, so I was off 2 wins. But his ERA, 2.43?
Yeah, 2.43, 30-30.
30 starts, 2.43, won 18 games. Lost game 7. Game 6. But as good a performance as you can have. And then, of course, it took 15, 18 years later before the Cubs finally erased the stigma. I bring that up because, the Cubs last year, they had Arrieta, who was as good as it was there. I mean, when you think of the Cubs historically, you don't think of a lot of years where they had great starting pitching because the Cubs never had great starting pitching. So if you think of the Cubs, they had Ferguson Jenkins. I come up with a couple of years for Ferguson. Kerry Wood had a couple of moments. Pryor had the big year. And Arrieta had a couple of years. But, I mean, other than that, the Cubs have not been a franchise that I can think of, top of my head. Now, Jenkins is a Hall of Famer, but, he had 4 or 5 years where he won 20 games, but he wasn't. I think one year he was 25-12. I mean, Jenkins was a very good pitcher. I never thought he was great. I know he's in the Hall of Fame. I thought he was very good. But the Cubs have never really sat there with a bunch of great starting pitchers. And then they bring Darvish in, who obviously, has been atrocious. And that was a sign that they are going to regret forever. Darvish, of course, last night a bad performance, got booed off the mound. Arrieta, meanwhile, had the great year a couple of years ago. I think he was 22-8. Is that what he was? I mean, whatever Arrieta was, he had the 2 good years. Arrieta had the 14-7 year where he had the great second half, and then he had the great year 3 years ago when he got through the wild card playoff game against the against the Pirates when he shut him down, and he was as good as it gets in that little stretch. Then he wasn't good against St. Louis, and then he really wasn't as good later on. Yes, he had his moments, pitched a no-hitter against Cincinnati and all those kinds of things, but never quite as good as the 1 year. So if you look at some of these guys, they have that 1 year. A lot of them can't sustain it. Wood, obviously, Pryor, Arrieta, they can't quite sustain it. And Harvey's another one. Harvey had a couple. Now Harvey's lifetime record is 38-38. It's nothing phenomenal. But this is a guy that everybody thought would be, the next time receiver for the Mets. And Harvey right now, he's a guy who's pitching himself off the roster when you get right down to it. I mean, Harvey's never going to get, now with, DeGrom didn't miss a start, but Harvey's never going to get that. He's never going to get a chance to start again. And he's out. He's out. If you take the pitcher and you spend a lot of money on it, be very careful. I mean, not Scherzer's come through. Don't get me wrong. We can come up with a few of them. Kershaw, not in the postseason. Bumgarner, fine, but not a. There's a lot more no's fall off the face of the earth than do's. You think the Red Sox like to take the contract back? How about them? You think they would like to say goodbye to that? I mean, give him $218 million, Price, who's pitching tonight. Yes, they would give back Price. The pitching, it's hard to maintain this pitching. Very difficult. That's the concern, and Harvey's a case in point here today. All right, call. I've talked enough. Calls are next. We'll get to it in a sec. 888 Mad Dog 6. Yankees again lead. And, of course, the Mets, who broke up a Tehran no-hit bid in the bottom of the 7th inning on a double by Cabrera. Mets haven't played well. The story of New York. Dodgers have played a big game today. Dodgers, by the way, have lost Ryu for a while now. He's going to be out until after the All-Star break because he tore a muscle off his bone in a groin area. So Ryu's not going to be able to walk forever. So that is an issue from him that you have to concern yourself with. We keep an eye on that. Zig Frikazi's in the house today. Zig not pleased. The Bruins ran into a brick wall last night that's called the left wing lock by Tampa because they could not penetrate that Tampa defense. So all of a sudden, Boston now is on the short end of the plank as they try to get home against the Lightning. They might be done now, Zig, in 5 games.
It's entirely possible, Chris, though they've battled back from adversities all year long, but I anticipate some changes for tomorrow night. Most notably, Ryan Donato to be back in the lineup. Possibly Brian Giunta, too.
Well, you are a great hockey fan.
Thank you.
Is that the old Brian Gianna from the Devils?
It sure is.
Played in the U.S. Olympic hockey team this year?
Sure. He actually helped them down the stretch, believe it or not.
All right, so Gianna might find himself a uniform in the lineup tomorrow night. Zig's got a sports bite. Your calls in a sec. Here's Zig first on Mad Dog.